The Anxiety and Phobia Workbook Summary. Edmund J. Bourne. A practical guide to overcoming anxiety disorders. In contemporary society, almost everyone suffers from anxiety. To cope with it, people turn to psychologists, books, and radio stations for help. However, they eventually find that even after spending so much time and energy searching for a cure, their anxiety not only remains, but they may feel even more stressed out and helpless. Is anxiety really this powerful? Is there any way to fight anxiety? This book provides a practical guide that will help those dealing with panic disorders, generalized anxiety disorder, and obsessive-compulsive disorder. Author, Edmund J. Bourne. Dr. Edmund J. Bourne is a leading psychologist who specializes in the treatment of anxiety disorders. He was the director of the Anxiety and Treatment Center in San Jose and Santa Rosa, California. With today's high prevalence of anxiety disorders, Dr. Bourne tells you that you are not alone in your fight against anxiety, and it is even possible for you to rid yourself of anxiety completely. Chapter 1. Overview. Hi, welcome to Bookie. Today we will unlock the book, The Anxiety and Phobia Workbook. Before we start, have you ever asked the question, do I feel anxious today? You might think that the answer is so obvious that it may as well be considered a fact of life. Who doesn't experience anxiety in modern society? One should remember that anxiety appears at different levels of intensity. Also, anxiety comes to us in various forms, which can be as pervasive as air. Have you ever been in a workplace situation like the following? Whenever you are faced with a new task given by your superiors, even if you have done all the preparatory work and should therefore be confident, you find yourself feeling nervous as you prepare to present your project. On the day of the meeting, as soon as you picture giving your presentation to your superiors and colleagues, you have symptoms of sweating, rapid heartbeat, and the inability to even speak in complete sentences. If you felt this way once or twice, it might just mean that you were nervous. But if you're in a similar situation every time, or you even want to quit your job because of this uncontrollable anxiety, then you may be suffering from social phobia, which is one form of an anxiety disorder. Nowadays, anxiety disorders are a common mental condition. There are many types of anxiety disorders, including social phobia, which is universal, panic disorder, in which one feels short of breath or even smothered for seemingly no reason, agoraphobia, in which one feels scared and helpless in crowded public places such as department stores, and obsessive-compulsive disorder, in which one may wash one's hands repeatedly to avoid contamination. In the book, The Anxiety and Phobia Workbook, the author elaborated on the causes and different types of anxiety disorders. He also covered ways to deal with them, with the aim of helping us fully understand anxiety and get rid of it as soon as possible. Celebrating 30 years as a classic in its field, this book ranks first among the 100 best-selling books on anxiety treatment in the world. It has sold over 1 million copies and has helped millions of readers around the world. Bourne, the author of this book, graduated from the University of Chicago. He is a doctor of psychology specializing in the treatment of anxiety disorders and related issues. As a leading psychologist in the study of anxiety disorders, he once served as the director of the Anxiety and Treatment Center in San Jose and Santa Rosa, California. In this book, The Anxiety and Phobia Workbook, he details various techniques for coping with anxiety disorders and brings hope to those who suffer from anxiety disorders around the world. If you or your friends and relatives are suffering from anxiety disorders, you can come with us as we dive into this classic book on treating anxiety disorders. Next, we will introduce the 3 key sections of this book. Part 1 about anxiety disorders. Part 2, causes of anxiety disorders. Part 3, getting rid of anxiety disorders. Chapter 2 Straight Face. About anxiety disorders. First, let's look at Part 1 about anxiety disorders. To better deal with the negative effects of anxiety disorders, we need to understand what they are. Anxiety can sometimes appear as very similar to fear, both of which cause us to feel a great deal of pressure. But they are entirely different. When you are afraid, your fear is directed towards a concrete object or situation. Whereas when you experience anxiety, you often can't specify what you're anxious about, nor can you find a specific trigger, because the focus of anxiety is more internal than external. You may be anxious about losing control of a certain situation or worry that something bad will happen for no reason. For example, a middle school student is particularly concerned about his academic performance. He gets a good score on every test. But as the year progresses, the student finds it harder to get a high score on the exams, while at the same time his desire for a high score gets stronger. So he wallows in deep anxiety every day, and he constantly studies in preparation for the final exam. He starts to feel nervous and irritable. He looks forward to the exams, but as the date approaches, he gets uneasy. This situation is a typical example of anxiety. But fear is different. The exam goes smoothly at the beginning, and it seems as though the student knows the answer to almost every question. The student knows that after he completes the remaining questions he can hand in his paper. However, when he is confronted with the last question, he finds it so difficult that he feels caught off guard and can't work it out. He is dumbfounded and nervous. He starts to sweat and release large amounts of adrenaline. This student showed a deep fear of this question, possibly with a bit of hostility. Many emotions trouble us, and it is important to have a comprehensive understanding of them. In a world where anxiety is widespread, not all feelings of anxiety can be called anxiety disorders. If your anxiety appears intermittently over a short period and doesn't interfere with your life, this feeling can only be described as anxiety instead of an anxiety disorder. Anxiety disorders are distinguished from everyday anxiety in that they involve anxiety that is more intense, lasts longer, and leads to phobias that interfere with your life. Many anxiety disorders are common in daily life. They are known as panic disorders, agoraphobia, social phobia, and phobias in a specific situation, such as animal phobias, acrophobia, and elevator phobia. Next, let's look at each of these anxiety disorders. Let's start with a panic disorder. A diagnosis of panic disorder is made if 1. You have had 2 or more panic attacks, and 2. At least one of these attacks has been followed by 1 month, or more, of persistent concern about having another panic attack, or worry about the possible implications of having another panic attack. For example, Luna emerged as a finalist in a modeling contest. The champion would become the spokesperson for a well-known international brand, a prize which Luna found very desirable. One part of the final round involved shooting a commercial for a brand of lipstick. While the shoot was happening, she suddenly felt a tightness in her chest and began to sweat all over. The photographer asked her if she had a history of hypoglycemia, but Luna couldn't say anything and was eventually taken to the hospital. Luna soon recovered, and the doctors diagnosed her with a panic attack caused by overwhelming mental stress. Another example is that after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, many Americans developed an airplane phobia, a fear that the plane will inevitably crash. When flying, they may feel extremely terrified and anxious. Some 9/11 survivors suffer from an elevator phobia because they were trapped in an elevator for a long time before they were eventually rescued. After that, they became extremely worried about being trapped again whenever they took an elevator. Another type of anxiety disorder is generalized anxiety disorder, which is characterized by chronic anxiety that persists for at least 6 months. It typically manifests itself when the patient has a variety of concerns, such as health, finances, or relationships. Those worries are uncontrollable and can consume a lot of time and energy. What's more, the intensity and frequency of the worry are always out of proportion to the actual likelihood of the feared events happening, which seriously affects the patient's normal life. In the group of people suffering from generalized anxiety disorder, women account for a larger proportion. The third type of anxiety disorder is obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, which is manifested as behaviors or rituals that you perform to dispel the anxiety that accompanies obsessive thinking. The most common symptom is repeatedly washing your hands to reduce anxiety about being contaminated, or repeatedly checking if doors and windows are locked properly to dispel obsessions about being robbed. Many people may suffer, to varying degrees, from obsessive-compulsive disorder. But when the compulsive behavior interferes with a person's social or occupational functioning, intervention is required. The fourth anxiety disorder is post-traumatic stress disorder, which is essentially the development of disabling psychological symptoms following a traumatic event. It usually occurs in people who have experienced severe trauma. These traumas can bring them intense fear and feelings of helplessness. This mental disorder can cause significant distress, interfering with social, vocational, and other important areas of your life. If you have PTSD, you tend to be anxious and depressed all the time. Soldiers who have experienced war or victims of rape generally have severe PTSD. That concludes our first part. To summarize, anxiety is not the same as fear, and not all anxiety can be called an anxiety disorder. Anxiety disorders are distinguished from non-clinical anxiety in that they involve anxiety that is more intense, lasts longer, and leads to phobias that interfere with your life. We also learned about several anxiety disorders that are common in daily life. They are panic disorders, generalized anxiety disorder, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorder. They invariably have a severe impact on a person's ability to live a healthy life. Now that we understand what anxiety disorders are, let's go over their causes. Chapter 3: Causes of Anxiety Disorders. If you're suffering from an anxiety disorder, you are most likely curious about the source of your illness. In this book, Bourne introduced 4 causes of how these problems develop and are sustained. Let's examine the biological causes first. When people find themselves becoming anxious, the first reaction in most cases is to suspect that a specific disease is responsible for their anxiety. Do diseases really cause anxiety? On this point, Bourne argues that physiological imbalances in the brain or body do not necessarily cause anxiety disorders, but that certain types of anxiety disorders may be associated with physiological imbalances. Many people are familiar with hypoglycemia. Its symptoms are similar to a panic reaction, including anxiety, shakiness, dizziness, weakness, and disorientation. If you are a woman, you may find that your anxiety problems worsen around the time just before your period. This has to do with the imbalance of estrogen and progesterone in your body, which can lead to changes in your psychological conditions, such as depression, nervousness, and mood swings. All of these feelings will undoubtedly increase your anxiety. In his book, Bourne points out that different anxiety disorders have different physiological explanations. Scientists have yet to confirm and understand the underlying biological causes of anxiety disorders. However, it is known that even if there is an underlying physiological imbalance in your brain, which is responsible for your anxiety disorder, there is no reason to think that you cannot be cured. After learning about the link between biological causes and anxiety disorders, let's now look at long-term, predisposing causes. The long-term, predisposing causes are factors that are present from your birth or childhood and later contribute to your anxiety disorder, such as heredity factors and your parents' behavioral patterns. Additionally, the influence of cumulative stress over time is also a contributing factor in the development of anxiety disorders. Are anxiety disorders inherited? The limited evidence that exists to date would argue that certain types of anxiety disorders are inherited. It seems that you don't inherit an anxiety disorder specifically from your parents. What is inherited seems to be a general personality type. People with a sensitive and irritable personality type are more likely to develop an anxiety disorder. Compared to genetic factors, the effects of childhood circumstances and experiences are more important. Researchers have found that if children do not have a good parent-child relationship or suffer from a severe separation anxiety disorder during childhood due to prolonged separation, they are more likely to suffer from agoraphobia and panic attacks in adulthood. If parents set excessively high standards for their children, are overly concerned about their children's safety, or restrict their children's autonomy, the children may be more likely to experience insecurity. Chapter 4: Getting rid of anxiety disorders. In the book, Bourne introduced many self-healing methods, 3 of which are highlighted for you here. The first method is a program of regular, vigorous exercise. It can relieve the physiological reactions caused by anxiety disorders such as panic attacks, sweating, and shortness of breath. For example, when you dance to rhythmic music, your tense skeletal muscles will relax, and your anxiety will in turn be reduced. Exercise also triggers a direct positive response from the body's endocrine system, which can also be effective in reducing anxiety. For example, when you go for a brisk walk outdoors, The production of endorphins will improve your body's ability to regulate your blood sugar and reduce the panic attack-like feelings produced by low blood sugar. So what are the best exercises for people with anxiety disorders? By comparison, aerobic exercise is the most suitable. The most convenient aerobic exercise is running, and all you need is a pair of running shoes. Numerous studies have shown that running helps relieve anxiety, and a 3-mile jog 4 or 5 times a week can diminish your vulnerability to anxiety. British author Matt Haig was diagnosed with an anxiety disorder at the age of 24. Through years of jogging, he eventually recovered from this illness. He wrote the best-selling book, Reasons to Stay Alive, based on his own struggles with an anxiety disorder. His book is also on Bookie, and those interested in learning more can listen to it. Another method of treating anxiety disorders is called exposure therapy, which advocates for confronting patients' inner fears. This may seem risky, but it is actually one of the most effective ways to treat anxiety disorders. For example, if you have a social phobia, exposure therapy will require you to socialize. The more you are afraid of dealing with people, the more you need to force yourself to engage with them. There is a medical treatment for allergic reactions called desensitization. If you are allergic to tetanus antitoxin, your doctor will administer it repeatedly in small doses until the required level is reached. This ensures that the medication is effective and helps prevent your body from having another allergic reaction. Exposure therapy used for anxiety disorders is based on the principle of desensitization. You confront a phobic situation directly, letting your anxiety rise and then subside while in the situation. You can break the process down into small steps and repeat the process with each small step. So how can we practice real-life desensitization? To start with, you have to set goals. If you have a phobia of airplanes, then overcoming that phobia is your goal. You then need to set up timelines for achieving your goals. For example, by what date would you like to be able to board a flight without feeling afraid? If it's 3 months from now, how will you implement your plan in 3 months? Chapter 5. The Anxiety and Phobia Workbook Review. We have now covered the main points of the book, the Anxiety and Phobia Workbook. Here's a recap of what we've learned. In Part 1, we learned that anxiety is different from fear and that not all anxiety can be classified as an anxiety disorder. Anxiety disorders are distinguished from non-clinical anxiety in that they involve anxiety that is more intense, lasts longer, and leads to phobias that interfere with your life. We also learned about several anxiety disorders that are common in our life. They are panic disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorder. They invariably have a severe impact on a person's ability to live a healthy life. In Part 2, we learned about the biological causes, long-term predisposing causes, short-term triggering causes, and maintaining causes of anxiety disorders. According to Bourne, physiological imbalances in the brain or body do not necessarily cause anxiety disorder, but that certain types of anxiety disorders may be associated with physiological imbalances. Among the long-term predisposing causes, childhood circumstances and parenting styles are more closely related to anxiety disorders. Sometimes short-term triggering causes are actually the real cause behind an anxiety disorder, instead of the predisposing causes. Finally, Bourne points out that in most cases, avoidance of phobic situations and withholding one's feelings can cause anxiety disorders to reoccur. In Part 3, we learned about self-healing methods for recovering from anxiety disorders. You can engage in mildly intense aerobic exercise. You can try exposure therapy to confront your inner fears. You can also practice meditation to help maintain your inner peace. These methods are effective in reducing both anxiety and fear. For those of us dealing with anxiety disorders, this is a suitable self-help book that deserves to be carefully read and studied. If we have faith and perseverance, we will one day be able to emerge from the dark shadow of our anxiety disorder and become a better person.